Right, so I'm just going to introduce you all. You all know Alec. Now, we have David Gimya, who was involved in the very first immigration case. We have got Linda Eaton, who was involved. She was actually the sister-in-law of Kath Eastwood, who is over here.
Yep.
And then we've got Barbara Ashworth, and then we have got David Baker. So Barbara is the mother of Dawn Ashworth, and David Baker was chief superintendent at the time, who led the investigation into the Enderby Narborough murders. So I'm actually going to start with you, David, because this was the very first case where DNA fingerprinting was actually used. As I say, so I actually teach this, and most people don't realize that actually the first case where DNA fingerprinting was actually used was actually an immigration case, and David was part of the family that was involved in that. So what do you remember from that period?
I'm probably, if you allow me, I'm also a journalist and an academic, so I'm about to spin your question around.
Go on then.
As you do. If you don't mind, just a sort of little caveat before, because, and I want to tell you a bit of backstory, because Tui was saying, please come and
Chat.
And you'll notice that I'm not here with my brothers and sisters because it's a really deep emotional thing for them. I know one person who would have loved to be here, and that would be my mum. She was the tour de force behind this, liaising with your good self and the Law Society. But sadly, she passed away around this time last year. So in itself, it's quite an emotional thing, and the family really felt that they would rather sort of pull back. But having said that, I thought, you know what, why don't we just use this opportunity to thank fantastically two main people. And that is Professor Alec Jeffreys, and that is also my mum, because really without my mum keeping this family together and pursuing what she did, you know, this wouldn't be the situation today. So I'm sort of stealing your question away from you to use this as a platform to thank. And then there are other sort of bits and pieces I can add afterwards, which are strange little arcs of how I've got to where I am as a consequence of this. But I might let you ask that question.
Okay.
You can tell I'm a journalist.
So talk us through the story. What happened, and how were you involved in it?
Okay. Again, too, I'm going to be quite guarded because I don't really want to make it about an individual. It was a situation where it was travelling back after a long holiday, and there was confusion amongst the immigration about the status of the family, said person, brother, and it seemed to, it was, you know, nobody seemed to want to believe that we were a family unit, that we were one another. And I'll say something which is actually quite interesting here, and I'm reflecting on something that Stormzy, Stormzy in the house? Yes. Stormzy said something recently when they asked him the question, he went 100%. And it was misinterpreted as to say the whole of the UK is 100% racist. He didn't mean that. 100% just means true. Now, I mean, coming from Ghana, it's easy to call someone who is your mum auntie. It interchanges. And so that word was used, and immigration thought, well, why in heavens would you call your mum auntie? And the consequence of that, therefore, became this kind of confusion. And it sort of laboured, and it went on, and mum was the nurse. She was up and down, toing and froing. If you search the TV archives, I think there's even some stage where we're on This Life with Esther Rantzen, good God. But what then happened is, I remember it was a last straw. It was this kind of last gasp attempt at how do you resolve this? What do you do? And not of my doing, but of the Law Society. And I was just talking to Shona, and I was just speaking to Professor Jeffreys, who tells it much better than I do, actually, I suppose. No, you do. And it's just an article that was printed in The Guardian, and it was a paragraph, was it?
The one paragraph.
The one paragraph that this amazing solicitor stroke lawyer picked up and thought, well, let's go through this, why not? And my mum said, yeah, okay. And the consequence of that was the case going before immigration. And you also tell me another story today that I've just heard for the first time, that within 2 minutes or so they went, yep, and just dropped it. So 2 years of angst in 2 minutes was just wiped away. And that's really how, that was it. That we are where we are today, and Mum, as I say again, was the real fighting force here, in ensuring that she didn't give up. And on behalf of our family, absolutely grateful to you for what you did. Now there's a little funny side to this, because the consequence of that was I found you were Dr. Jeffries at the time, weren't you? Oh, you was, you see. I thought, God, this is really interesting. At the time, I was applying to go to uni. So I went to, at the time it was called Leicester Polytechnic, and I did a degree in applied chemistry, thinking, oh, I like this. There's someone in the house today who broke me into radio, Vijay Sharma, thank you. Dr. Vijay Sharma. And at radio, because of that, when I did my postgrad, my dissertation was on genetic fingerprints and Huntington's disease. And at the time, I got to interview him and Baroness Warnock, the late Baroness Warnock. I didn't let on. I sort of just did the interview and then pulled back. He doesn't know this. But the flip side to that, as a way of acknowledging the impact, was that when I was doing my doctorate at UCD, we were looking at narrative storytellings and patterns. And I remembered really well patterning and how you can take a story and you can identify where it comes from in terms of neorealism or whatever it is, third way. When you look at news, we do news in a certain way, but you can look at areas and through the patterning, identify where it comes from. And some of those ideas actually emerge from that itself. So that's the sort of arc which I sort of take away from me as to what it's and how it's kind of helped me and what he's done for me and the family at large.
Fantastic. So, I mean, for Alec, obviously for you, it was the first time that it was actually ever used. Was it a case of Shona, who can't make it today, but sends, tremendous hugs and kisses to all of you, basically? But did she just simply ring you up and say, I've got this case?
Yeah, I think I can't remember if it was a phone call or a letter, but it was certainly within weeks of publication.
Yeah.
I mean, she'd approached and said, look, we've got this very, very difficult immigration dispute. I'm representing the family. It's been dragging on, I think, for 2 years. So this was a long, protracted business. I think it was, there were significant health costs for your mum, and she was suffering. And anyway, as David said, it went to an immigration tribunal and they just dropped the case. And sometimes people will ask me about, all the things that have happened to you, was there ever a magic moment? And I know exactly what it was. It was at that immigration tribunal where Sheena was inside the tribunal, I was outside with your mum. Sheena came out, they dropped the case against your brother, and Sheena came out and said, go and tell him, to this lady, that everything's okay. And it was this big hug and the look in your mum's eyes, a sudden lifting, this terrible burden that she'd been carrying for 2 years. That was the magic moment. Forget all the rest of it. That's the moment that I would truly value. Very important.
Thank you, sir.
How lovely. Right, so we're going to turn to the first forensic case now, and obviously it's not appropriate to go into it in detail, but in short, in 1983, Linda Mann was killed. In 1986, Dawn Ashworth was killed. And these incidents happened in the Enderby and Narborough. And I suppose what I really want to do is concentrate on the girls. And I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about your daughters. Tell me about Dawn. What was she like?
Oh, she was a wonderful daughter. I was lucky enough to have a girl, being my firstborn, and then Andrew, a son. 17 months between them. They were like that for each other. And you think you have every blessing, and then you get the rug pulled from under you. And that's the only way I can describe it, because you lose the camaraderie that you had between your children within the house, and life has to carry on for them. But Dawn was very sensible. For her age, she lived a very full life. She had a Saturday job, which she loved, and even with the small amount that she earned when she went on that Saturday job, it was amazing. There was always a bunch of flowers
Oh, how
from
lovely.
me, and
Yeah.
and there was even one there when she went missing.
Yeah.
You know.
Hmm. She sounds like a lovely girl.
Yes, she
Yeah.
was. She was. Well, you know,
Yeah.
I made the most of the time that I had with her
Mm.
since. You know, thinking good, happy thoughts.
Yeah.
That's all you have left.
Mm. So, tell me about Linda.
Well, a daughter, the same, but she'd already got a sister of 2 when she was born in the July, so it was nice summer time. And from then on, it was all activity, colour. She loved colours. She loved to draw fashion on lady sketches and things, and it was just full on family, very busy, very happy, and local community was brilliant, and very good at school, both of them,
Yeah.
and they go on, you know, and grow up and become, as they get to teenage, you know, it's that age
Teenage
coming
friend.
up, yeah. And she was big. She knew where she wanted to go. She had the direction. She got the strength. She got the brain, and she knew. And life just carried on as normal until suddenly, that's it. It stopped, changed, and there's nothing more to say. You just can't put words to it.
I know you had quite a lovely story about Linda, about how she was a bit shy, wasn't she, in a photo you were telling me at one point.
Our wedding photo. My husband is Kath's brother. And when we got married on the wedding photos, Linda wouldn't look up. She was only about 2 or 3, wasn't
Yeah.
she? Can't remember
Very
how old she was.
Just coming up to 3, I think.
Yeah. So everybody's saying, everybody look at the camera, smile, and there was Linda. Like this. And we kept saying, Linda, look at the camera, please look at the camera. No, like this. And then we realised what it was. She'd got chicken pox and she didn't want anybody to see her spots on our wedding photo. So we've got some lovely wedding photos with Linda with her head down. And you can't see her.
I've got all the others, don't worry.
That's fine.
Lots.
That's fine. But she was a cheeky little thing. And as soon as she looked at you with those big brown eyes, you knew that whatever she was asking for, she was going to get. Because she just looked at you like, and you'd gone. Absolutely. Absolutely.
She sounds lovely.
She was.
Yeah.
She was she was a part of our family, wasn't she?
Of course
And she
was.
still is. So both
Yes,
the girls
yeah,
still are.
very much.
Yeah.
So, David, this was where you came in, obviously leading an investigation into these tumours, which must have been of incredibly high pressure. How did you come to know about Alex's work and come to contact him? What was the story there?
Well, the story was that we'd got a young man in custody who was admitting or making certain admissions to the murder of Dawn, but was totally denying any involvement in the murder of Linda. We'd got other circumstantial evidence which went along with what he'd said, and as a result of that, we'd charged him with the second murder. We interviewed him at some length, but there was a total denial of any involvement in the murder of Linda Mann. So in consequence of that, we needed something else. We'd got his blood group, which was similar to samples from both girls, but that was 40% of the population. And I'd read an article which appeared in the Leicester Mercury, which involved Sir Alec and the paternity tests which he'd done, which brought the DNA into being, and of course that could bring the blood sample down to the individual as opposed to a percentage. The lowest percentage that we could get was 12.5%, by view of subgrouping. So we asked Sir Alec, can you do this for us? Can you do the DNA test? So we sent the samples off of the young man and Linda Mann, and the result came back that he wasn't responsible for the death of Linda. So in consequence of that, I've sent the samples from Dawn and asked for the same test to be done. And that test came back negative. And of course, what also came back was the fact that the man in custody wasn't responsible for either murder, but there was a man out there in the community who had committed the murder on both girls, leaving his samples behind. So of course we've got to start from somewhere, then from square one. Now we'd already been through the inquiry once and twice, with house-to-house inquiries and various interviews and interrogations of people, and it had to come back negative. So we needed then to put something else to the equation, and so we decided to use DNA as a sample of obtaining a sample from every young man that lived in the vicinity of the villages of Narborough, Enderby and Littlethorpe. And so we set about obtaining blood samples from all of the men in the age group of 18 to 34, and these were sent away to Aldermaston to be examined. And of course at that stage we needed quite a lot of blood from everybody, and we needed doctors and phlebotomists and other medical people to do it. So it was quite a big job.
So what was it like in the villages? I know you were saying the uptake was great. You were saying the atmosphere in the village was actually quite good, wasn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it always has been. I mean, it was like stepping back in time. It was very sort of everyone knew everyone else, and I never noticed the fear and that was going around because we were too busy. I mean, our lives were shattered. And we were trying desperately to sort of cling on to some sort of normality and, vetting every phone call that you had or this, that and the other, people trying to get some response, back from you. So I was never privy really to how frightened the community was as a whole. I mean, when you think about the implications of having, someone else and people looking over the shoulder and but I don't know, we'd switched off from all that.
Yeah.
It was we didn't register anything really at all, as I say.
And Kath, do you remember, what was it like? Quite a few people took part, didn't they? They seemed to be very pleased to help.
Everyone seemed quite happy about it.
Yeah.
But it was the fact that it was bringing up, obviously, family disputes along the way. And the community was beginning to break up a little bit. Change. You could feel a change.
Yeah.
But the people who took part were amazing. They just walked in dozens, very pleased with that. I mean, you couldn't ask for more. But we didn't know at the time, how it would work out because it had never been done, as far as we knew. We didn't know what it was about, this DNA, quite a very new thing.
Yeah. And this was your idea, wasn't it? It was based on something that had been done previously with fingerprints before, wasn't it? It was your idea to start
there'd been a
this.
case some years earlier where manual fingerprints had been requested from the occupants of a village where a murder had been committed, and of course it was the process of taking the fingerprints which led to the arrest and conviction of the individual in that village.
So it was presumably with that in mind that you thought, right, let's try this with blood samples and go around the villages and see
Well,
if
we
can get
needed,
the-
we certainly needed something else,
Mm.
because we were looking at everybody who lived, worked, or played sport, or visited the area. So we got quite a database of people
to do
to
it,
go
yeah.
through.
And there's a twist to this story, though, isn't there? Because it didn't work out quite how you thought it was going to.
We'd anticipated what, may happen, that somebody would try and dodge the system or would refuse to give a blood sample, and then of course we would be able to hone in on them and identify who that was. And one of the things that we did was we sent a letter to everybody we wanted the blood from and asked them to bring with them a passport or driving licence or some other photographic identification, because we knew then that if somebody got somebody else to do it, then somebody else would know that there was something going on. And of course that's exactly what happened, is that there was a party from a bakery where our man worked, and he wasn't there, but there was a number of his fellow employees, and during the evening a young lady that was in the company overheard a conversation from his accused that he'd taken the blood test for this man, and in consequence of that she came forward and told a police officer some days later that she knew, and it was immediately passed on to us in the incident room, and of course we identified the two men responsible, and we arrested both of them on the same day, the one that had taken the blood test and the one that had asked him and supplied the passport, and of course he was arrested and charged, and as soon as he was arrested he admitted the murder of both girls. Subsequently we did a DNA test on him, and that corresponded with the samples that we'd obtained from the two girls. So it was game, set and match.
That must have been an incredible feeling to have all of this sort of come together, all the police work plus the genetic work. How did that feel once it all come together?
It was a sense of relief.
Yeah.
I mean, it was realised that it was a job well done, and of course it was the consequences of the work we'd done with DNA which enabled us to come to the conclusion that we did.
I mean, it was such an extraordinary story. Did you know then just how big it was going to be? Did you feel it then?
Yes, we realised the importance of it because it brought the samples of an individual down to one, as opposed to a high percentage of the population. So instead of being 40%, it was down to the individual. And I mean, that has proved paramount in all the investigations using DNA today.